This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 95 of the Construction Record podcast. I'm Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today. In today's episode of the Construction Record, we feature an interesting conversation I had with world-renowned airport architect Luis Vidal of Luis Vidal and Architects based in Spain. Luis and I discussed designing the airport of the future post-COVID-19. We explore topics on how airport design can help bridge the divide between personal freedoms and safety at airports, how big data and AI can help transform airport design, and we also discuss the use of sustainable materials, project collaboration, and finding that special aha creative moment on a project. Before we go to the conversation with Luis, I want to share with you, listeners, both old and new, a little creative mind visualization trick I do for myself with these one-on-one podcast interviews. Thanks to the internet, we bridge massive distances with this podcast, but the physical setting is rather rudimentary most of the time. You have an office desk, a microphone, and a screen on one end of the conversation, and on the other end you have an office desk, a microphone, and a screen. The internet brings us together, but it's all rather kind of just plain. So before I start my conversation, I picture a setting with my guest in my head. Sometimes it's at a bar, sometimes it's a coffee shop, sometimes it's a bench, sometimes we're just in a hallway at the office, or we are walking and talking. That's how I put myself in the frame of mind for the conversation. So for this conversation with Luis, my setting was influenced by his Spanish heritage and my Italian heritage. I visualized a cafe-type table with a red and white checkerboard tablecloth, and this table is either at an Italian piazza or a tapas restaurant along La Rambla, where Luis and I discuss all things airport design. So with that visual in mind, let me take you to that conversation. I'll be popping in and out with questions that I asked of Luis as we sat there and discussed the design of airports in the future post-COVID-19. Here is Luis Vidal on the Construction Record. Hello, listeners. Vince here again. So here we are at that first discussion point I was really looking forward to having with Luis, and that was exploring how best to ensure that sense of security and freedom in airports in a post-COVID-19 era. Here's what Luis had to say.
Transmitting security is about transmitting a number of values. Some can be technologically based, others can just be more perception based. It's all about how the passenger feels and how we can reduce their anxiety. You see, before the pandemic, our effort in airports was about providing passengers the feeling of freedom. Mm-hmm. Now that our freedom has been taken away from us through this pandemic, we are less free to move, we have to wear masks, we're being continuously monitored. We have to be able to provide passengers again with the feeling of freedom, and that will be done through a number of visible and invisible measures, all destined to provide, as I was saying before, at least a perception of more security. So technology coming in that recognizes people's face even with wearing masks, facial recognition with masks, head counting. There will be numerous devices which will be counting people, seeing where they agglomerate, and be rerouting people to avoid long queues. We will see, obviously, the introduction of big data that will, together combined with artificial intelligence, be extremely proactive in introducing security into those buildings.
Hello again, listeners. Vince here. So here we are at that part of the conversation I was having with Luis, which I found intriguing. He's mentioned before the use of big data and AI. Through our reporting and covering the industry, we've seen AI and big data gained momentum over the last half decade as a tool in the design and construction toolbox. What I was surprised to hear was how layered big data is when it comes to the design of airports. Here's Luis to explain that.
Well, we have always been collaborating with the latest technologies, and big data is not only about the recollection of data on people, but also the recollection of data on luggage, recollection of data on origin and destination, passengers and people's interest, but also data on workers on the airport, control, barrier of frontiers, customs, also people working on the stores and the retail. It's all about understanding all the architecture, if you want, in terms of when you talk about technology, that in a very anarchic way, because the anarchy here is the movement of the people. And because they're all moving freely, then you start encountering a super complex mathematical algorithm on how to predict what may happen next.
With that answer, Luis presented an interesting juxtaposition. You have the anarchy, as he puts it, of people and their movement within a space, meeting the purpose and mandate of that space, in this case, the airport. You have free will butting up against needing to process. So I wanted to know from Luis was, how can design help better circumvent or make that experience less transactional for travel? Here's what he had to say.
First of all, we have to acknowledge that there's mainly two different airport types. So you have an origin destination airport, where people fly to, and you have hubs, which is where people transfer. And therefore, to go from a given origin to a given destination, but they will make a transfer somewhere. So the nature of both is completely different. At the same time, the other concept, which is extremely important to introduce on either of them, is basically what we call the concept of flexibility. So both building types need to be ready to adapt very quickly to changes. When I say quickly, it could be even within the turn of half an hour, not on a 2-week or 1 month construction program. But I mean, I would guess, if you think of a journey, from the moment you leave your home or your hotel until you reach your home or hotel or visitor's home, wherever you're going, the amount of things that happen along this journey, not only the main, obviously you need to get on a plane. Secondly, your bag needs to get on the plane. But then you also need to be delivered to your destination and your back as well. So we have a lot of transportation also issues from and to your airplane. But also your back. But also all the things in between. You need to be fed. You need to drink. You may need to use the restroom. You may want to buy or read or shop or work. So there's many different interactions in those journeys. And the key is to, as I was saying before, be able to provide the passenger and all those interactions with a seamless, free journey.
The next part of our conversation with Luis is very interesting and really displays to me the forward-thinking nature of someone like Luis and his team as they design airports. COVID-19 has been a reset button for many of our business practices around the world, and obviously it's really impacted worldwide travel. The last time we had a reset button on a global scale, one could say, when it comes to travel, was 9/11. So Luis and I explored a little bit of what 9/11's impacts were, and he easily takes that conversation to the future, to the post-COVID-19 era when it comes to airports. And I think you will find this part really informative.
What's fascinating about 9/11 is that it came at the beginning. Everyone thought it was going to be here for a while, but it actually came to stay. It's been 20 years now,
Right.
and visibly nothing has changed. Technology is obviously a little bit better, but the reality is we live inside an act. And when I say an act, it's part of a play. It's a theater, because most of those measures are not required anymore. You don't need to take off your belt and your shoes and your computer and your liquid to go airside. There's plenty of technologies around there that can, sort that one out. But it's perceived by the passenger as they're going into a more secure area. And that is why mainly it's being kept. And the same is going to happen with COVID. Everyone thinks COVID came and will go. Some people hope in 3 months, some people hope in a year. But no, COVID came to stay. And COVID will stay with our society for decades, if not forever. And the other fascinating thing I keep telling my clients is that no matter what, we are thinking in a very short time frame. People are thinking in 1-2 years frame. We should be looking further. What's going to happen to the next virus? What happens if the next virus doesn't travel through air or travels through water? What happens, So we cannot be just static analyzing a given problem in a given moment. We have to look at this with a much wider and long-term vision.
You can't help but wonder when you're discussing with Luis about design for the future, what kind of landscape is he operating in when he deals with owners of these projects? Are they the ones coming to him with a checklist of sustainable features and the use of sustainable materials, or is he presenting it to them? I wanted to know the answer to that question, and here's what Luis had to say.
Nothing is standard, and everything responds to a given challenge or a given necessity. And therefore, you will find airports or clients that are more sympathetic or more sensible towards the use of greener materials. Now, some are showing predisposition to look at materials which are antibacterial and antivirus. So we will see the introduction of new materials, based most of them on titanium dioxide or silver or copper. Some clients happen to exist in a given infrastructure, and basically for consistency reasons, and not necessarily that they feel very comfortable with what they have, but for consistency reasons, they would rather continue with the same palette of materials. And consistency is not only a visual and aesthetic, it's also a very practical and pragmatic decision. You have maintenance, you have to replace things that break. So it makes sense to have the same materials applied onto new infrastructure. So like I say, there's always different challenges and needs.
As I approach my end of my conversation with Luis, I can't help but still think about that juxtaposition he presented earlier and apply it to a different question. It was that juxtaposition of free will and anarchy versus process that happens at an airport. But what I wanted to know from Luis was, considering the checklist of things that need to happen to make an airport a viable structure and a functioning structure, whether it's during the COVID-19 era or not, does that moment of creativity, does that moment of, aha, this is what I want to bring to this project, does that happen still organically? And here's what Luis had to say.
To me, designing a new infrastructure, whether it's a new terminal or rehabilitation and extension of an existing terminal, and sometimes even the shortage of terminals, sometimes we do make buildings smaller. The wow moment, the moments of excitement come always unexpectedly.
Right.
It could be anything that triggers them. It could be a conversation. It could be visiting another building. It could be while traveling or reading a book.
Right.
And suddenly, it just clicks, and you go back to the team and you say, let's try this, and then you see the outcome. And we work, unlike some other architectural practices, we work constantly with a lot of numerous options and variations. We always have the drawing board packed with different options and variations so that, we can make the best decisions and then present them to the client for his consideration.
When you look at the list of projects Luis and his firm have worked on, you see different countries and continents represented. It made me wonder, what is his approach when it comes to collaboration on airport construction projects?
We've always been very dialogue and understanding practice. And we're not the typical capricious architect that says, I want this because I want it. We're not like that.
Right.
We talk, we speak, we have a dialogue, and we always find the best, most optimal solution between the team, between all of us. And the team, the team is the contractor and the owner. I've always said the best buildings are the result of the best combination of the best client, the best contractor, and the best design team. And that's a key to success. If one of the three fail, then you will not have a super great, excellent building.
Was there anything maybe you want to share with listeners? Maybe they should consider the next time they work up the courage to travel again and go into an airport. What should they keep in mind as they walk through these, as I call them, gateways of nations?
I think they should keep in mind that there's an army of soldiers out there looking after their security, both physical and health, and that they should really move through those buildings trying to return to the most desired and forgotten normality, where they really can walk and move around those buildings freely.
And there you have it, folks. That was our conversation with Luis Vidal about the future of airport design. Once again, my thanks to Luis and his team for helping make that podcast conversation possible. We really enjoyed it, and I hope you, our listeners, did as well. Next week on the Construction Record, we have our first ever meeting of the pods. That's two podcasts coming together for one conversation. This podcast, the Construction Record, and the Livecost podcast based in Ireland came together just recently to discuss all things construction on either side of the Atlantic. So please tune in for that. It's both a video and audio podcast, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. And once again, take care, everyone. Thank you.
The Construction Record is brought to you by the BC Construction Safety Alliance. Through programs, services, training, and consultations, the BCCSA is making safety simpler. Find out more at bccsa.ca.